Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales and boundless imagination come to life. Enjoy the story and don't forget to subscribe.
Elliot traced a finger along the worn spine of a first edition of War of the Worlds, a wistful smile playing on his lips. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight filtering through the tall windows of Ye Old Book Nook, his sanctuary in workplace. The aroma of aged paper and leather was as comforting to him as a warm embrace. He was a bibliophile through and through, more comfortable in the company of fictional characters than actual people. Business was slow on this Tuesday afternoon, as it often was. Elliot didn't mind. He used the quiet time to indulge in his passion, carefully cataloging new acquisitions and occasionally losing himself in the pages of a forgotten gem. He was currently reshelving the science fiction section, making sure the Asimov was properly separated from the Heinlein. A sudden, sharp chime from the front door startled him. He glanced up, expecting Mrs. Higgins from down the street, but the bell seemed to have rung on its own. Frowning, Elliot rounded the corner of a tall bookshelf. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceiling space. "Anyone there?" The only response was the gentle creaking of the old building settling. He walked towards the front of the store, his brow furrowed. Perhaps a draft had caught the door. But the air was still and heavy. As he reached the front counter, a shimmer caught his eye, a distortion of the air near the doorway, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer day. He blinked, thinking he was imagining things. He had been burning the candle at both ends lately, fueled by caffeine and late-night reading. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The distortion remained, solidifying into a vaguely humanoid shape. Elliot's breath hitched. This was no trick of the light. Before he could react, the shimmering figure resolved itself into a woman. She was impossibly tall, easily 6.5 feet, with skin that seemed to shimmer with an internal luminescence, like polished silver. Her features were sharp and elegant, almost alien in their perfection. Long, platinum hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes, a startling shade of violet, regarded him with an unnerving intensity. Elliot stood frozen, his mind struggling to reconcile the impossible reality before him. He had read about encounters like this in countless science fiction novels, but he never imagined he would be the protagonist. "Greetings," the woman said, her voice a melodic and strangely emotionless. "I am Lysandra." Elliot swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. I'm Elliot," he stammered. "Can I help you find something?" He felt absurd offering customer service to what was clearly an extraterrestrial being. Lysandra tilted her head, studying him with an almost clinical interest. "I am not here to browse your primitive literary artifacts. I am here for you." A chill ran down Elliot's spine. "For me? What do you mean?" Before she could answer, a beam of light enveloped Elliot, lifting him off his feet. He gasped, his arms flailing as the bookstore dissolved around him, replaced by a blinding white void. Panic seized him, a primal terror that eclipsed all his intellectual curiosity. He felt weightless, disoriented. His stomach lurched as the light faded, revealing a stark, metallic corridor. The walls were seamless and curved, the lighting cool and sterile. He was definitely no longer in Kansas, or rather, in his beloved bookstore. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice trembling despite his best efforts. "Where am I?" Lysandra appeared beside him, seemingly unfazed by his distress. "You are aboard my vessel, designated Collector." "Collector?" Elliot repeated, his mind racing. "What are you collecting? Stamps? Beanie Babies?" Lysandra's lips curled into a faint, condescending smile. "I collect specimens. Biological specimens, from various planets. You, Elliot, are my latest acquisition." Elliot stared at her, dumbfounded. "Acquisition? You mean, you kidnapped me?" "The term is somewhat crude, but essentially accurate," Lysandra replied, her tone devoid of apology. I have selected you for observation and study. Study? I'm not some lab rat. Elliot protested, his anger beginning to surface. I have a life. A job. People who care about me. Lysandra raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Your life, as you call it, is inconsequential in the grand scheme of the universe. As for people who care about you, your species is remarkably sentimental, but your emotional bonds are fleeting and ultimately insignificant. Insignificant? Elliot sputtered. That's a load of. He struggled to find a suitably eloquent insult, but his mind was too overwhelmed. Lysandra sighed, her expression suggesting she was dealing with a particularly tiresome child. I have no desire to engage in a philosophical debate. Suffice it to say, your perspective is limited. You will adapt. She began to walk down the corridor, her movements fluid and graceful. Elliot hesitated for a moment, then followed, his mind still reeling. Where are we going? He asked, his voice subdued. To your quarters, Lysandra replied. You will need to acclimatize to your new environment. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, filled with strange and intricate machinery. The air hummed with an unfamiliar energy. Elliot stared around in awe and apprehension. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined, even in his most outlandish science fiction fantasies. What is all this? He asked, gesturing to the complex array of devices. This is my laboratory, Lysandra explained. I conduct research on the various species I have acquired. You will have ample opportunity to observe my methods. Observe? Elliot repeated. Are you going to dissect me or something? Lysandra paused, her violet eyes meeting his. Dissection is inefficient. I prefer non-invasive methods of study. Think of yourself as a pet. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. Elliot felt a surge of indignation. A pet? I am not a pet. I am a human being. You are a specimen, Lysandra corrected, her voice cold and unwavering. A member of a species I find mildly intriguing. You will be housed, fed, and provided with certain amenities. In return, you will be observed and occasionally subjected to tests. Tests? Elliot's heart sank. What kind of tests? That will depend on your cooperation, Lysandra replied, her lips curving into a predatory smile. Suffice it to say, resistance is discouraged. She led him into a smaller room, which, while still sterile and metallic, was slightly more inviting. A large, circular bed dominated the space, and one wall was a transparent viewport, revealing a breathtaking panorama of stars. This will be your living space, Lysandra announced. It is equipped with everything you require. Food will be provided, tailored to your species' nutritional needs. Entertainment will be available, in the form of holographic simulations. And, of course, I will visit regularly to monitor your progress. Elliot stared at the luxurious but impersonal surroundings. It was like being in a high-tech prison cell. I don't want any of this, he said, his voice tight with anger and despair. I want to go home. Lysandra's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained cold. Home is a concept that loses its meaning in the vastness of the cosmos. You are here now, Elliot. Accept it. She turned to leave, her silver hair shimmering in the artificial light. One more thing, she said, pausing at the doorway. I expect you to be compliant. I have little patience for disruptive behavior. Understand? Elliot glared at her, his fists clenched. I understand that you're a heartless alien who kidnapped me from my life. I will never accept this. Lysandra sighed, as if dealing with a particularly unruly toddler. You will learn, Elliot. You will learn. With that, she swept out of the room, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft hiss. Elliot was left alone, staring out at the infinite expanse of stars, feeling utterly lost and helpless. He sank onto the bed, his head in his hands. What have I gotten myself into? He whispered into the empty room. What am I going to do? Elliot spent the next few hours pacing his quarters, a caged animal in a gilded zoo. The panoramic view of the cosmos, which had initially awed him, now felt like a taunt, a constant reminder of his isolation. He tried the holographic entertainment system, but the alien dramas and simulations were incomprehensible, filled with strange symbols and bizarre narratives. He rejected the nutrient paste that appeared in a dispenser, the bland, gray substance an insult to his palate. He needed a plan. He couldn't simply accept his fate as Lyssandra's pet. He had to find a way to escape, or at least understand what she wanted from him. He started by examining his quarters in detail. The room was sparsely furnished, but everything was made from advanced materials he couldn't identify. The walls were smooth and seamless, with no visible doors or windows other than the viewport. He tried pressing against the walls, hoping to find a hidden panel or release mechanism, but nothing budged. Frustrated, he turned his attention to the viewport. Perhaps he could signal for help. But who would even see him? And what were the chances of rescue in the vast emptiness of space? Still, he couldn't give up hope. He spent hours studying the star patterns, trying to memorize constellations and identify any familiar landmarks. He had a basic understanding of astronomy from his reading, but it was hardly enough to navigate interstellar space. As darkness fell, or rather, as the artificial lighting dimmed in his quarters, mimicking a diurnal cycle, Elliot began to feel the weight of despair settle upon him. He missed his bookstore, his books, the simple routines of his life. He missed the familiar faces of his customers, even Mrs. Higgins with her endless complaints about the price of paperbacks. He curled up on the circular bed, his stomach growling with hunger. He knew he had to eat something, but the thought of consuming that tasteless paste made him nauseous. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, the door to his quarters hissed open. Lysandra stood in the doorway, her silver skin gleaming in the dim light. "Are you acclimating, Elliot?" she asked, her voice as devoid of warmth as the metal walls around them. Elliot sat up, his anger flaring anew. "Acclimating? I'm being held captive. I haven't eaten anything, I can't understand your entertainment, and I'm terrified. How do you expect me to acclimate?" Lysandra tilted her head, her violet eyes studying him with detached curiosity. "Your emotional response is predictable. Most specimens exhibit similar distress upon initial confinement. It usually subsides with time. I'm not a specimen." Elliot insisted, his voice rising. "I'm a person. I have feelings, thoughts, dreams. You can't just treat me like some lab rat." Lysandra stepped into the room, her presence filling the small space. "You are a biological entity, subject to the same laws of nature as any other organism. Your feelings, while interesting, are ultimately irrelevant." "Irrelevant?" Elliot scoffed. "My feelings are what make me human. They're what drive me, what give my life meaning." "Meaning is a construct," Lysandra replied, her voice dismissive. "A self-deceptive mechanism designed to alleviate the existential anxieties of primitive species." Elliot stared at her, his anger giving way to a strange sense of pity. She was so cold, so detached, so utterly devoid of empathy. How could anyone live like that? "You don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice softer now. "You don't understand what it means to be human. To love, to hope, to dream." "I understand the neurological processes that underpin those phenomena," Lysandra countered. "I have studied your brain activity. I can quantify your emotions. But I do not experience them. That's the problem." Elliot exclaimed. "You can study us all you want, but you'll never truly understand us if you don't feel what we feel." Lysandra paused, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Elliot thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of curiosity, perhaps, or even sadness. But then it was gone, replaced by her usual impassive gaze. Perhaps, she said, her voice carefully neutral. But understanding is not my primary objective. My purpose is observation and analysis. And what are you analyzing? Elliot asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. My eating habits. My sleeping patterns. My profound existential angst. All of those things, Lysandra replied. And more. I am studying your social behavior, your cognitive abilities, your physiological responses to various stimuli. Stimuli? Elliot repeated, his heart sinking. You mean, experiments? Experiments is a somewhat loaded term, Lysandra said. I prefer to call them, controlled observations. What kind of observations? Elliot pressed. Are you going to poke and prod me? Subject me to painful procedures? Lysandra hesitated, her eyes flickering away from his. Certain interventions may be necessary to gather sufficient data. Elliot felt a surge of fear. Interventions? What kind of interventions? I assure you, nothing unduly harmful, Lysandra said, her voice losing some of its usual confidence. I am bound by certain ethical protocols. Ethical protocols? Elliot scoffed. You kidnapped me from my home. What kind of ethical protocols are those? Lysandra sighed, as if she was growing weary of the conversation. My actions are guided by the principles of scientific inquiry. The pursuit of knowledge justifies certain compromises. Compromises? Elliot repeated. You're compromising my life. My freedom. My sanity. Your sacrifices will contribute to a greater understanding of your species, Lysandra said, her voice regaining its cold authority. You should be honored to play such a vital role. Honored? Elliot laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. I'd rather be back in my bookstore, shelving books and drinking tea. I don't want to be a vital role in your twisted scientific agenda. Lysandra stepped closer to him, her violet eyes piercing his. You have no choice, Elliot. You are my acquisition. You will do as I require. Elliot glared at her, his fists clenched. I may be your prisoner, but I am not your slave. I will not be broken. I will resist you every step of the way. Lysandra's lips curled into a faint, almost admiring smile. Resistance is intriguing. It provides valuable data on the adaptive capabilities of your species. She turned to leave, her silver hair shimmering in the light. I will return in the morning, she said. Prepare yourself for your first observation. The door hissed shut, leaving Elliot alone in his quarters, his heart pounding with fear and defiance. He knew he was in a dangerous situation, facing an enemy with superior technology and a complete disregard for human life. But he refused to give up. He would fight for his freedom, for his dignity, for his very humanity. He spent the rest of the night formulating a plan. He knew he couldn't overpower Lysandra directly. She was too strong, too fast, too intelligent. But perhaps he could exploit her weaknesses. Her lack of empathy, her detachment from emotions, her over-reliance on logic and reason. He would try to appeal to her humanity, to awaken some spark of compassion within her. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance he had. As the artificial dawn broke, casting a pale light across his quarters, Elliot steeled himself for the day ahead. He would be Lysandra's pet, but he would also be her challenge. He would test her, push her boundaries, and force her to confront the humanity she so readily dismissed. He would show her that humans were more than just biological specimens. They were complex, flawed, and capable of extraordinary things. He would show her the power of the human spirit. And maybe, just maybe, he would find a way to escape. The aftermath of the Zarian encounter left Elliot feeling strangely invigorated. The near-death experience had shaken him out of his passive acceptance of captivity, replacing it with a newfound sense of purpose. He was no longer just a specimen in a cage, he had proven himself useful, capable of contributing to Lyssandra's survival. But the incident also highlighted the vast chasm between him and his captor. He had reacted with instinct, driven by a desire to protect Lysandra, while she had acted with cold efficiency, prioritizing the safety of her ship above all else. He still didn't understand her, but he was beginning to realize that understanding her was the key to his freedom. In the days that followed, Elliot found himself exploring more of the ship. Lysandra, perhaps impressed by his resourcefulness, granted him limited access to certain areas, under strict supervision, of course. He visited the hydroponics bay, where strange, bioluminescent plants grew in nutrient-rich solutions, providing sustenance for Lysandra and her other specimens. He saw the engine room, a cacophony of humming machinery and shimmering energy fields that defied his understanding of physics. And he observed the observation decks, where Lysandra spent hours studying the cosmos, her violet eyes fixed on distant galaxies. During these explorations, Elliot began to piece together a better understanding of Lysandra's world. He learned that she was a member of a highly advanced civilization known as the Kryll, a species that had long ago abandoned emotions in favor of pure logic and reason. They saw themselves as benevolent observers of the universe, collecting and studying other species to better understand the complexities of life. But their detachment made them seem arrogant and callous to Elliot. One day, while wandering through a dimly lit corridor, Elliot stumbled upon a small, unassuming chamber. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint, rhythmic humming emanated from within. Curiosity piqued, he cautiously peeked inside. The chamber was sparsely furnished, containing only a single, raised platform in the center of the room. Seated on the platform was an alien unlike any Elliot had seen before. It was small and frail, with wrinkled, gray skin and large, luminous eyes. Its body was hunched over, and its limbs were thin and spindly. But there was an aura of wisdom and serenity about it that captivated Elliot. The alien sensed his presence and looked up, its luminous eyes meeting his. "Greetings, traveler," it said, its voice a soft, melodic whisper. "I am Zorgan." Elliot hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the chamber. "I'm Elliot," he said. "I'm a guest on this ship." Zorgan smiled, a network of wrinkles spreading across its face. "A guest, you say? I have been a guest here for many cycles. But I suspect our definitions of the word differ somewhat." Elliot shifted uncomfortably. "I'm being held captive," he admitted. "By Lysandra." Zorgan nodded knowingly. "Ah, Lysandra. The collector. She has a peculiar fascination with your species." "Fascination?" Elliot scoffed. "She treats me like a lab rat. She doesn't care about me, or anyone else. She's completely devoid of emotion." Zorgan chuckled softly. "That is not entirely true. Lysandra is complex. She has simply suppressed her emotions for so long that they have become dormant. But they are still there, buried beneath layers of logic and control." "You think so?" Elliot asked, skepticism lacing his voice. "I haven't seen any evidence of it." "Patience, young one," Zorgan said. "Emotions are like seeds. They need time to germinate and grow. You must find a way to nurture them, to awaken them from their slumber." "How am I supposed to do that?" Elliot asked, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "I'm just a bookstore clerk from Earth. I don't know anything about alien psychology." "You know more than you think," Zorgan said, its eyes twinkling. "You understand the human heart. You know what it means to love, to hope, to dream. Those are powerful forces, Elliot. They can break down even the most formidable barriers." Elliot sat down on the floor, feeling a glimmer of hope ignite within him. "So, you're saying I can change her?" "Perhaps," Zorgan said. "Or perhaps she will change you. The universe works in mysterious ways. But one thing is certain, you are not here by accident. You have a purpose, Elliot. You must discover what it is. Elliot spent hours talking to Zorgan, learning about his history, his philosophy, and his understanding of the Kryll. Zorgan was a member of an ancient and peaceful species known as the Harmonians, who believed in the power of empathy and compassion. He had been captured by Lysandra many years ago, but instead of resisting her, he had chosen to observe and understand her. Lysandra is lonely, Zorgan told Elliot. Despite her vast knowledge and her technological superiority, she is deeply isolated. She has cut herself off from the most essential part of life, connection. But why? Elliot asked. Why would she choose to live like that? The Kryll believe that emotions are a weakness, a source of irrationality in conflict, Zorgan explained. They have purged themselves of these so-called weaknesses, but in doing so, they have lost something precious. They have lost their humanity. Elliot pondered Zorgan's words. He realized that Lysandra's coldness was not a sign of strength, but of vulnerability. She was afraid of her emotions, afraid of losing control. So, what do I do? Elliot asked. How do I help her? Be yourself, Zorgan said. Show her what it means to be human. Share your joys, your sorrows, your hopes, your fears. Let her see the beauty and the complexity of the human experience. Elliot nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He would not try to change Lysandra, but he would show her that there was another way to live. He would be a beacon of humanity in her sterile, logical world. He left Zorgan's chamber feeling lighter, more hopeful than he had in weeks. He had a purpose now, a mission. He would not simply endure his captivity, he would use it to make a difference. As he walked back to his quarters, he passed Lysandra in the corridor. She paused, her violet eyes meeting his. Where have you been, Elliot? She asked, her voice devoid of emotion. Visiting a friend, Elliot replied, a smile playing on his lips. Lysandra raised an eyebrow, but she did not press him further. Prepare yourself, she said. Tomorrow, we will begin the next phase of your observation. I look forward to it, Elliot said, his smile widening. Lysandra stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she turned and walked away, her silver hair shimmering in the light. Elliot watched her go, his heart filled with a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready for the challenge. He was no longer just a specimen in a gilded cage. He was a catalyst for change. And he would not rest until he had awakened the humanity within Lysandra's heart. The next morning, Elliot awoke to a commotion outside his quarters. Alarms blared, and the ship vibrated with an unsettling intensity. He rushed to the viewport, peering out at the starfield. He saw nothing but the familiar expanse of the cosmos, but the sense of urgency in the ship was palpable. Suddenly, the door to his quarters hissed open, and Lysandra strode in, her silver skin gleaming in the emergency lighting. Her expression was grim. We have a situation, she announced, her voice clipped and urgent. There is a disturbance among the specimens. Disturbance? Elliot repeated, his heart sinking. What kind of disturbance? A rebellion, Lysandra said, her voice tight with anger. They have somehow managed to disable the containment fields in their sectors and are attempting to seize control of the ship. Elliot's mind raced. He knew that Lysandra had collected dozens of different alien species, each with its own unique abilities and motivations. If they were all working together, they could pose a serious threat. What can I do? Elliot asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lysandra hesitated for a moment, her violet eyes meeting his. I require your assistance, she said, her voice betraying a hint of desperation. Your knowledge of human behavior may be useful. Elliot was surprised by her request. He had expected her to dismiss him as irrelevant, but she was actually asking for his help. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice gaining confidence. I need you to help me restore order, Lysandra said. I need you to understand their motivations, predict their actions, and find a way to quell this rebellion before it escalates. Elliot nodded, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was his chance to prove his worth, to show Lysandra that he was more than just a pet. Where do we start? He asked. Lysandra led him out of his quarters and into the chaotic corridors of the ship. The alarms continued to blare, and the air was thick with tension. They passed by several security drones, their weapons trained on the various corridors and chambers. The rebellion appears to be centered in the lower sectors, Lysandra explained. The specimens have managed to breach the security checkpoints and are now attempting to reach the bridge. How many are there? Elliot asked. Too many, Lysandra replied. And they are becoming increasingly organized. As they approached the lower sectors, they encountered pockets of resistance. Small groups of specimens clashed with the security drones, the air filled with the sounds of energy blasts and alien roars. Elliot watched in horror as a hulking, reptilian creature tore through a security drone with its bare hands. He realized that this was more than just a disturbance, it was a full-scale war. We need to find a way to stop them, he said, his voice barely audible above the din. I am working on it, Lysandra replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. But their defenses are surprisingly sophisticated. They have somehow managed to disrupt my control over the ship's systems. Elliot paused, his mind racing. He needed to think, to analyze the situation, to find a weakness. What are their demands? He asked. Lysandra scoffed. Demands? They are not making demands. They simply want freedom. Freedom? Elliot repeated. You mean they want to escape? Yes, Lysandra said. They believe that if they can reach the bridge, they can override the ship's navigation system and set a course for their home worlds. Elliot nodded, his mind clicking into place. He understood now. The specimens were not simply rebelling, they were trying to escape. And they were willing to risk everything to achieve their goal. I have an idea, he said. But it's risky. I am open to suggestions, Lysandra replied, her voice betraying a hint of impatience. We need to appeal to their sense of self-preservation, Elliot said. We need to convince them that escape is impossible, that their actions are futile. How do you propose we do that? Lysandra asked. We use the ship's communication system, Elliot said. We broadcast a message that will shatter their hopes and force them to surrender. Lysandra considered his suggestion for a moment, then nodded slowly. It is worth a try, she said. But what will you say? Elliot thought for a moment, his mind searching for the right words. He needed to appeal to their common humanity, to their shared desire for survival. I will tell them the truth, he said. I will tell them that escape is impossible, that the ship is too far from any habitable planet, that their only hope is to surrender and trust in Lysandra's mercy. Lysandra looked at him, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. You believe they will listen? I don't know, Elliot admitted. But it's worth a try. We have nothing to lose. Lysandra led him to the ship's communication center, a small, enclosed chamber filled with complex equipment. She activated the system and handed him a microphone. Speak, she said. Elliot took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice echoing through the ship's corridors and chambers. Attention, all specimens, he said. This is Elliot, a human from Earth. I am speaking to you as a fellow prisoner, as someone who understands your desire for freedom. He paused, waiting for a response. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice crackled over the speakers, a guttural, alien voice that sent a chill down his spine. What do you want, human? The voice said. Why should we listen to you? Because I know the truth, Elliot replied. I know that escape is impossible. The ship is too far from any habitable planet. You will die if you try to leave. Lies, the voice roared. We will find a way. We will be free. No, you won't, Elliot said, his voice growing stronger. You are being led astray by false hope. You are being manipulated by those who seek to exploit you. Who are you to speak of exploitation? The voice sneered. You are nothing but a pet, a plaything of the KRYLL. That may be true, Elliot said. But I am also a survivor. And I know that the only way to survive is to surrender. To trust in Lyssandra's mercy. Mercy, the voice scoffed. The KRYLL know nothing of mercy. That is not true, Elliot said. I have seen a glimmer of compassion in Lyssandra's eyes. I believe that she is capable of understanding our plight. But only if we show her that we are willing to cooperate. He paused again, waiting for a response. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sounds of the ship's alarms. Finally, the voice spoke again, its tone less hostile this time. What do you propose, human? It said. I propose a truce, Elliot said. A ceasefire. We lay down our weapons and surrender to Lysandra. In return, she promises to treat us with respect and dignity. She promises to find a way to return us to our home worlds. The voice was silent for a long moment. Then, it said, we will consider your proposal, human. But we make no promises. Elliot released the microphone, his heart pounding with exhaustion. He had done all he could. Now, it was up to the specimens to decide their fate. He looked at Lysandra, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Did it work? He asked. Lysandra's expression was unreadable. I do not know, she said. But the fighting has ceased. For now. As the hours passed, the tension on the ship slowly began to subside. The specimens gradually emerged from their hiding places and surrendered to the security forces. Lysandra kept her promise, treating the prisoners with respect and dignity. She provided them with food, medical care, and comfortable quarters. She even allowed them to communicate with their home worlds, assuring them that she was working to find a way to return them to their families. Elliot watched in amazement as Lysandra transformed from a cold, detached collector into a compassionate and understanding leader. He had never seen her like this before. One evening, as they stood on the bridge, watching the stars drift by, Lysandra turned to Elliot, her violet eyes filled with gratitude. You saved my ship, Elliot, she said. You saved my life. I am in your debt. Elliot smiled, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. You don't owe me anything, he said. I was just doing what I thought was right. You showed me the power of compassion, Elliot, Lysandra said. You showed me that emotions are not a weakness, but a strength. She reached out and took his hand, her touch sending a shiver down his spine. I am grateful for your presence in my life, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Elliot looked at her, his heart filled with a warmth he had never experienced before. He realized that he was falling in love with Lysandra, the alien who had kidnapped him from his home. I think I'm falling in love with you, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Lysandra's eyes widened, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. I do not understand, she said. I know, Elliot said. It's crazy. But it's true. Lysandra stared at him for a long moment, her mind struggling to comprehend the complexities of human emotion. Then, she did something that Elliot never expected. She leaned in and kissed him, her lips soft and gentle against his. The kiss was electric, a spark that ignited a fire within Elliot he didn't know he possessed. It was a blend of curiosity, gratitude, and something deeper, something that transcended the vast differences between their species. But as quickly as it began, it ended. Lysandra pulled away, her violet eyes wide with confusion. I do not understand this, she stammered, her voice uncharacteristically flustered. This sensation, it is illogical. Elliot chuckled softly, his heart still pounding. "I know," he said. "Love often is. But, it is, disruptive," Lysandra protested. "It interferes with rational thought. It clouds judgment." "Maybe," Elliot said. "But it also makes life worth living. It gives us purpose, meaning, connection." Lysandra looked at him, her expression a mixture of fascination and fear. I am not sure I am capable of this, love," she said. "You don't have to be," Elliot said. "Just be yourself. And let me love you." Lysandra stared at him for a long moment, her mind wrestling with the conflicting emotions within her. Finally, she sighed. "I need time to process this," she said. "I need to analyze the data." Elliot smiled. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be here." In the weeks that followed, Lysandra continued her observations of Elliot, but her approach had changed. She was no longer just a detached scientist studying a specimen, she was a curious explorer delving into the mysteries of the human heart. She asked him about his childhood, his dreams, his fears. She listened intently as he recounted stories about his bookstore, his friends, his family. And she began to share her own experiences, her own thoughts, her own vulnerabilities. Elliot learned that Lysandra's detachment was not a choice, but a consequence of her upbringing. The KRYLL society valued logic and reason above all else, and emotions were seen as a hindrance to progress. From a young age, KRYLL children were trained to suppress their feelings, to analyze everything objectively, to make decisions based on pure logic. Lysandra had excelled at this training, becoming one of the most respected scientists in the KRYLL empire. But beneath her cold exterior, there was a yearning for something more, a desire for connection, for intimacy, for love. Elliot's presence had awakened that yearning, forcing her to confront the emotions she had long suppressed. And she was terrified. One day, Lysandra approached Elliot with a solemn expression. "I have made a decision," she said. "I am returning you to Earth." Elliot's heart sank. He had hoped that he could change her mind, that he could convince her to embrace her emotions. But it seemed that he had failed. "I understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I knew this couldn't last." "It is not that I do not care for you, Elliot," Lysandra said. "It is simply that I cannot reconcile my feelings for you with my responsibilities to my people. I am a scientist, a leader, a representative of the KRYLL empire. I cannot allow my personal desires to interfere with my duty." "But what about what you want?" Elliot asked. "What about your happiness?" "My happiness is irrelevant," Lysandra said. "My purpose is to serve my species, to advance our knowledge, to ensure our survival." Elliot stared at her, his heart aching with sadness. He realized that he could never truly break through her defenses, that she would always prioritize logic over emotion. "I'll miss you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I will miss you as well, Elliot," Lysandra said. "You have changed me. You have shown me that there is more to life than logic and reason. You have shown me the power of the human heart." She paused, her violet eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Perhaps, one day, our species will be able to coexist peacefully," she said. "Perhaps, one day, we will be able to embrace the full spectrum of human emotions. But until then, we must remain apart." Lysandra returned Elliot to Earth, depositing him in a remote forest in upstate New York. He watched as her ship disappeared into the sky, his heart filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. He was home, but he was not the same. His experience with Lysandra had changed him, broadened his horizons, deepened his understanding of the universe. He had seen the vastness of space, the diversity of life, the complexities of love. He returned to his bookstore, but he could no longer find solace in the familiar routines of his old life. He missed Lysandra, her intellect, her curiosity, her unwavering commitment to logic and reason. He spent his days reading science fiction novels, dreaming of a future where humans and aliens could coexist peacefully, where love could transcend the boundaries of species. 1 year later, as Elliot was shelving books in his store, a shimmer appeared in the air near the doorway. He looked up, his heart pounding with anticipation. Lysandra stepped into the store, her silver skin gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. "Hello, Elliot," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. Elliot stared at her, his heart overflowing with joy. "Lysandra," he whispered. "What are you doing here?" "I have come to a decision," she said. "I have realized that my happiness is not irrelevant. That my duty is not just to my species, but to myself." She paused, her violet eyes meeting his. "I have resigned my position in the Kryll Empire," she said. "I have severed all ties with my past. I have come here to be with you." Elliot's heart soared. He rushed towards her, embracing her tightly. "I love you, Lysandra," he said. "I love you too, Elliot," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. And so, the alien collector and the human bookstore clerk began a new chapter in their lives, a chapter filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. They knew that their relationship would not be easy, that they would face challenges and obstacles along the way. But they were determined to make it work, to build a life together that transcended the boundaries of their species. They opened a new bookstore, a bookstore that specialized in science fiction and fantasy. They traveled the world, exploring new cultures and meeting new people. And they shared their story with everyone they met, inspiring them to embrace the beauty and the diversity of the universe. And as they looked up at the stars at night, they knew that their love was a beacon of hope, a symbol of the potential for understanding and connection in a vast and often lonely cosmos.